He's listening to me.
Yeah, there you go.
How are you? Look good.
Thanks.
It's just going to be yesterday.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had such a pretty
Thanks. This is a, oh gosh, I should have looked up bluer hairstyle. Thank you. My husband slowed down a little last night.
I had two arms go off. I thought I had two other arms. I was gone out my house in that house. Right now. I got it. Came aware because I was sleeping still.
Hey. That's all right, dude. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, Lance.
How are you?
Good. How are you? Yeah, I got the matching dress.
How you doing? Good, thanks. How are you?
Okay,
Good.
Good.
Good. How you guys doing?
I was going to say, you can look.
Morning, all right.
Just depends on how it's. This is, I think this is a 10. Yeah, no, 12, and it all. Amazon will eat that.
Ready to rain early. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Good to see you.
Good morning. It's 9:30. Welcome auditors. Welcome Jim Sundberg, wherever you are. He was here just a second ago. And we're going to get going on this for our audit exit conference from the auditors. And I'm going to start out with our Pledge of Allegiance. And if you join me, we'll move this meeting along. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This is a special meeting for our transit district, obviously, and I said we're going to have the annual state audit exit conference, but before we do that, we have a little acknowledgement from Mr. Sundberg for his years of service to this transit board. We miss you. We're happy you're here, Bruce. We missed Jim too. And if you would come forward, I would like to present this to you. This is put together by the staff, and it says, "Thank you, Jim, for your unwavering support during the challenging times." And it's a nice little display. It was a pleasure, really, truly a pleasure working with you on this board.
Well, thank you very much. These are kind words, and I hold Island Transit near and dear to my heart.
How you do? Okay, thanks.
So, thank you, staff.
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh. Get to shake your hand.
Do that again?
Congratulations on taking the place.
Maybe. And I think Bruce probably can count on you for a little background from time to time. You think?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think he walks away with a lot of corporate knowledge regarding the good times and the tough times.
Yeah.
I
live in the same city, trust me.
There
I've spent a lot of time in this house.
During this conference, the presentation will be by the auditors only. There will not be any public comment. We will not be taking public comment. So this is going to be a short meeting, and we're going to be out of here as soon as you're finished with your report. And I really appreciate the time that you took for the pre-exit conference on the telephone. It kind of gave us a heads up of where we're going and what the official documents are. Anybody who wants information from the auditor's office can go directly to the auditor's office to get that information. We will not get into a dialogue about this today, if you have any questions. So please introduce yourself, and we're going to get going right now.
All right. Well, thank you for having us today. I'm Andy Osbjornson. I'm the audit manager for the team, and Kelly Conkin was the auditor in charge of the audit, and Michelle Palmer was the supervisor of the audit. So we're here to share the results of the audit. This is the exit conference presentation for Island Transit. This is an opportunity to share the results of our audit. We have many documents that we have passed out. We have the exit conference handout, which we'll start with, and then a couple of reports. And we do have a couple of management letters to address. There's no there's no findings in this audit, so we'll speak to those results as well. But we're going to share the results as it will be presented through our audit reports and how it will be presented out to the public. So this year, the audit scope was fiscal year 2014. It covered accountability and financial statements. And I will pass it over to Michelle, who will take us right into the accountability audit report and the results of the accountability audit. And if there's any questions at any time, feel free to ask. This is an opportunity to make sure that everyone's aware of the results and what we did.
So in this packet, all the documents are kind of in the order that we'll speak about them. So the exit conference document is on top, and then next is the accountability audit report, and I'll be going through that report. If you turn to page 4 of that report, that is really where we get into the audit summary and the results of that audit. It starts out with results in brief, and here we really take a risk-based approach in our accountability audits to ensure that the transit has complied with state laws and its own policies. Really, the focus of our accountability audit this year was to follow up on some issues that we had identified in the prior audit. And again, we did identify one management letter that we will be sharing with you related to payroll. And just about the audit, like Andy mentioned, it's for the 2014 year. And the bullet points on the bottom are the areas that we covered. Open Public Meetings Act, we look at every audit we go to. We did not identify any issues with that. Financial condition, we followed up from our finding from the last audit, and we have noted that the transit's financial condition has significantly improved, and we do not have any recommendations during this audit. So we'd like to recognize and commend the transit for its work in improving its financial condition and really monitoring that. Payroll and leave, we do have a management letter related to payroll and leave that was a follow-up from our last year's finding. The reporting level for that has dropped down one to management letter. There were several items from our finding in the prior audit that were addressed, and I'll get into that more in just a minute, but there still were a couple items that we recommend the transit continue to work on to improve. Vehicle use monitoring, this was an exit item last year, which is more of a kind of a housekeeping item that we recommended. We do have a repeat exit item for vehicle use monitoring, and really the transit is tracking its use of mileage, and it is separately tracking its use of fuel. However, there is not a process where the fuel and the mileage are compared to each other to ensure that the fuel is reasonable compared to the mileage. So we recommend that process be connected so that there's that analysis. The travel and meal policies, that again was an exit item in our prior audit. It again is an exit item in this audit. And really the travel and meal policies, we recommend that there be a little bit more clarity in those policies about when a person goes into travel status, when a meal is appropriate in travel status, so that it can be applied consistently and to ensure what kind of reimbursable expenses there are in travel status. And then the last bullet point there is the State of Good Repair grant. We did have a finding on that last year. Our follow-up of that, we did not have a single audit this year. However, we did follow up on each of the items that we reported on in the prior audit. And our focus of that was to ensure that the transit worked with the FTA to resolve that. And from the correspondence between FTA and the transit, that finding was resolved and the corrective action taken satisfied the FTA. So we again do not see any issues this year with that grant. So really this report states that the transit did follow state law and in compliance with its own policies, with the exception of the management letter, and states and references the management letter. So that's kind of what the summary of that report will say. The page 5 is the status of prior audit findings. So this kind of gives a summary of the payroll finding that we had in the prior audit, and it states that there was a couple of issues in that audit, and one being the approval of the salary schedule, which was corrected. The board has been approving that on an annual basis at this point, and there were also there was an adequate oversight of the former executive director's salary performance or leave usage in the prior audit.
Could you please restate that? I didn't hear the first part of that comment.
Sure. The part about the salary schedule?
Yes.
Yeah. In our prior audit, we had a finding over payroll that the board was not approving the transit-wide salary schedule. However, during the audit this year, we followed up on that, and we had noted that the board is now approving that salary schedule on an annual basis, and so that part has been resolved. And then the second part was the former executive directors. There was not adequate oversight over the former executive director's salary performance or leave usage. However, there is now a new executive director on contract and has a new contract, so that part resolved most of its issues. We have noted that this was partially corrected because we still have identified some issues with compensation time, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But the corrective action taken, this is a response directly from the transit, and we did not alter this language at all, and we agree with it. So at this time, I will jump into the management letter, which is the next document in your packet. The front of it has January 20th, 2016 at the top. It's just a one-page, two-sided document that looks like this. The front is just a kind of a cover letter that describes the scope of our audit and how to contact us, and that this information is provided to management to address audit issues that we've identified. On the back of that page, you'll see it titled Payroll. And these are our recommendations for the current audit that we're reporting to the board. And we did have part of our finding from the prior audit also included control weaknesses over compensation time, and that is time worked beyond a regular 40-hour work week. And we have identified that there was some improvements made to track compensation time. However, there still is no centralized oversight for over-salaried employees' compensation time balances or leave usage. We did some testing with compensation time and leave. And what's occurring is that the salaried employees are tracking their own accrual and use of the compensation time at the bottom of their timesheet. And the way that these timesheets are approved is that each manager is approving their own employees separately. So what would have to occur to know if that compensation time is correct is that manager would have to look at the last timesheet and compare it to that timesheet, which may be occurring with some managers, but we did identify some errors with that. Also, salaried employees are reviewed just by that department level manager and are not being all turned into the payroll department. And so if a manager were to fail to remit a request for leave to payroll, payroll would not know that any leave was taken and would not be able to deduct any sick or vacation leave from that employee's balance. We did also identify from our review of the timesheets that there was inconsistent review by department managers. Several would sign off on each weekly timesheet, but there were other departments that did not sign off on those consistently. There were some minor errors in compensation time accruals and discrepancies between leave deducted and completed timesheets. However, there weren't any significant discrepancies, and we reported all of those to the payroll manager, who's looking to follow up on those as well. And in addition, the interim executive director contract states that time for hours, the interim executive director does receive compensation time for hours worked beyond 40 hours in one work week. However, he's not being paid for that compensation time. It's just an accrual of time, like a time bank that can be used at a later date. However,
Can you come back to that just a minute? So, when I sign the timesheets for the interim executive director, sometimes there's 46 hours or 43 hours on that the actual payment is only for 40 hours.
That's
what
correct.
I've seen on that. Likewise, when there's one that is under 40 hours, let's say it's 36 hours, so it's 4 hours. So the banking of the over hours are balanced against the under hours, so the net effect on any month or during the year is still no compensation beyond 40 hours. Is that what you found in your audit?
That is correct.
It's a little awkward comparing that to the contract?
Correct.
Okay.
The contract language states that the contractor's work be full-time with a maximum of 40 hours being compensated. Now, our interpretation of that is, however, compensation time is not specifically being paid at any one time. That is still a form of compensation, even if that is being taken on a later week to make up for short hours, let's say 36 or 37 hours in a week, where compensation time is applied to that next week.
So then the answer to correct that is to change the language in the contract?
Yeah, that's one option.
Yeah.
We have no issue with if that's the intention of the contract. We're just saying that it's inconsistent with the language in the contract. Either correct the contract or have the practice follow what the contract states.
Okay.
So I might be a little old school here, so I thought if you were a salaried employee, that if you work 80 hours a week, well, you work 80 hours a week. If you work 30 hours a week, you work 30 hours a week. That there's not an hour tracking when you're a salaried employee. Am I like still in the 1950s, or how did I get so off track with where we're at?
You were born in the 1950s.
I really did think that there wasn't a tracking of hours if you're a salaried employee. You just work.
Yeah, and the current contract has an hourly employee setup. All right, so it's the current language of that contract. So there are other options of the contract language.
And Ken is not a salaried employee.
Got it.
Yeah, he's a contractor.
contracted hourly.
But my overall like perception, because I need to make sure this is right, so I'm just gonna take advantage of you. My overall perception that if you're a salaried employee, you're getting a salary and the hours you work vary sometimes. That still holds true.
Yeah, there are contracts that are established like that, with salaried employees.
It really depends on how the contract is written and what the policies of the entity are. I guess a standard typical salaried employee does work the way you're explaining, but there are, some entities that have salary policies where, we expect you to work 40 hours a week, but if you do go over, we will compensate you for that. So it just really depends on how it's set up with the entity.
So I just want to check if I had some more time.
So the contracts have to be consistent with the process.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're auditing the contract.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what about department heads? Because we have salaried employees for department heads. Is that going to be described in policy, how we're going to handle that? Because they're not contract employees. What is your recommendation on that? You're getting.
Yeah, we're looking at the employment policies. So we're looking at the employee policies when it comes to those. And that is what's established through the compensation time, the tracking of that. And we're just looking to see that that's accurate and that there's some sort of centralized method to ensure those numbers are accurate.
And that comes back to the centralized.
Yeah.
oversight.
We would expect that to be in policy. However, this case is a little bit different because this is not an employee, it's a contracted employee. So really, none of the employee policies cover this situation. It's all just based on that contract. And that's what the language we were using.
Okay, another question for you. Ken is interim. We're in the process of seeking a permanent. Is this something that we should change by contract now when his current agreement terminates with the transit district, I think April 15th? I mean, it's really short term in here now. Do you recommend that we actually work that language agreement out now or make the correction that we have a new director?
So we see that the current practice doesn't necessarily follow what we read as the language of the contract.
Okay.
So if you'd like to continue with that practice, we recommend an adjustment be made to the current contract if that's how the district would like to keep going with that contract. And then for future contracts, just consideration of what that job's going to entail and how you write up that contract.
Was our previous CEO, was she contracted or was she
She was an employee.
an employee?
Right.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
I was just going to address something further than Jill, and Paul, you can correct me, but from what we saw from doing payroll testing, there is a policy on who is salary exempt versus not exempt from getting that 40 hours a week, and it's very clearly defined by the transit, so it was very clear who got that comp time over 40. So the current practice of the transit is employees who are salaried, who work 40 hours, over 40 hours a week, get it as comp time, but only at time. Is that correct, Paul?
For the people in administration, this case.
Right. So they do get that bank for time over 40 hours, but they're only getting it at time as opposed to like an hourly employee who would get it at the time and a half of an overtime work. So that's kind of the current practice. We saw reviewing the transit's policy and payroll documents.
I want to ask Ken and Paul a question. We have a meeting on Friday. Is that too short of notice for you and your staff to develop an outline of corrective action that is consistent with the audit recommendations?
Paul and I have discussed, or started to lay out that plan. As far as time goes, I'm going to leave that up to Paul as far as how much time we need, but we've already been developing that plan. I don't know that Friday is doable, but I'll leave that up to you, Paul.
We'll just do the best we can. We can shoot for it.
Well, we have to have that on the agenda if we're going to discuss it? It's kind of an administrative request. This is not an action that we're taking now. But I think this is time sensitive, and the next time we meet is 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and I don't want to be kicking this can down the road.
I think we would prepare as much as you can within 2 days.
Yeah.
As an information item.
Yeah, I think as an information item, even if it's a narrative about what you're going to do, and more importantly, or just as importantly, when.
And that would be because we're also in the search process right now.
That's right. And we'd like to shake that kind of stuff out, have a policy in place before the new person comes.
Are there organizations that just have exempt employees without reference to comp time?
Well, there's many different variations. Other transits, you have many different variations of employment. Several will have, the different levels of administrative or exempt employees or non-exempt employees and hourly employees. I don't think I'm not sure if there might be an organization that has only one level, but we often see a variation of all.
And the way the transit is doing that, giving employees comp time, it isn't unusual. I mean, that's how our organization works. So it's not I wouldn't say it's out of the norm. And the recommendation is really just to, regarding the tracking of the
No,
time.
I understand the difference between the recommendation and my question. I'm just trying to, again, use your experience to think through some of my own internal questions. I didn't realize that you could get comp time and be a salaried employee. I come from a culture where the guarantee of the salary is what you sometimes work more and you sometimes work less, and when you work more, the benefit is that you have a salary that guarantees you a certain number of hours. So I'm just confused about the comp time and salary employee, because that seems like an hourly compensation methodology for a.
It depends on the definition, and I think we get into the HR technical aspects that we're not complete experts on, but you could definitely research it. But I'm more of I can't bank anything. I don't get hours beyond my 40 hours. So, but other levels within our organization, they get to bank hours. So we have different classifications of the different employees within our organization.
I'll do my follow-up. I just was taking advantage of it.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Okay, so I'll just continue here. We're still on this payroll management letter, and the other point I wanted to make for this is there was a 1-month period from June 15th, 2015 until July 15th, 2015, where the interim executive director's contract did lapse. There was a verbal documentation in the minutes that the board had agreed to continue the contract. However, the original contract stated that there may not be any verbal modification of the contract. It was required to be written, and there was just that period, that 1-month period where there was no effective contract at that time. But it was subsequently corrected. So, any more questions on that? If not, I will move on. Going back to this accountability report, there is on page 6. This is the corrective action of the prior audit finding of the State of Good Repair grant, and basically, I'm not going to read it word for word, but it states that it gives a summary of the finding. It states that it was fully corrected and that the transit worked with the FTA to make those corrections. And the FTA was fully satisfied with the transit's action taken. Page 7 just references our financial report, which we'll get into in just a moment. And then just some information about the transit and the state auditor's office on the last couple of pages. if there are no more questions about our accountability audits, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who is going to discuss our financial statement audit.
All right, so that's kind of I guess the fourth thing in your packet. It says financial statement audit report. So the first 2 pages of it are just kind of what the financial report is, table of contents. But then on page 4, so we'll really get into the meat of it. And this is the prior audit findings, so from the 2013 financial statement audit. And
Let me emphasize again to the public, this is for the 2014
Yes.
audit period, not 2015.
correct.
Yes, yes.
So this here, and Michelle touched on it, the transit received a finding regarding financial condition, not effectively monitoring financial activity, that expenditures exceeded revenue, and kind of putting the transit in a financial condition. And this is the response from the transit, and we do consider it, we do agree with this statement here that it is fully corrected, and there were no changes made to any of the wording here. We did agree with the wording that the transit did take the necessary steps to better the transit's financial condition, and that's all talked about here.
Can I interrupt you again,
Yep.
please? I'm on page 4
Yes.
of the financial statement audit report.
Yeah.
And it's dated January 1, 2013 through December 31, 2013, but down in the audit period, in the bar just below that, it's referencing January 1, 2013 to December 31, 2014.
Yeah, that will be corrected
Thank
for
you for
that.
catching
I
that.
just wrote those notes as well. And that's why we're bringing in the draft document. So there's still time for the final review of details.
So tell me the correct ones then. Is it January 1, 2014 then and not 13?
No.
This covers the audit period that this status prior audit finding is relating to is the January 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2013. So that's the 2013 audit period.
Okay, and that 14.
14 should carry the same header that will be carried throughout the audit report, which
But in
is
that
fiscal
bar,
year 14.
in that bar, that 2014 should be 2013.
In the
Correct.
table, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the corrective action part of the bottom of that's the transit's response after they received our 2013 finding. So it was what had been done in 2014 to correct that. Any questions on the prior audit status? All right, so the next report on page 5, this is our report over internal controls. And really it's just identifying any deficiencies in internal controls would be identified here. We don't give an opinion on internal controls, but if things are identified, this is the report they would be identified in. In the first paragraph on there, the last sentence says, as discussed in note 11 of the financial statements, the 2013 financial statements have been restated to correct a misstatement. So as I'll discuss in another document a little bit later, there was a significant, there was a prior period adjustment corrected. So that's what this report is referring to in that sentence. It's kind of a modified sentence from our normal report. So that's what that's discussing. And then on page 6 is where we identify that we do have a management letter regarding the financial statement audit. So we can get into the management letter. It's kind of the next document there. And again, just like the other management letter, it has kind of the cover letter. And then on the back side of it, it has a financial statement review as a header. And during our review of the transit's preparation of the financial statements, we saw a lack of secondary review of the financial statements, notes, schedules, and journal entries. which that kind of secondary review ensures that the financial information was accurate, compliant with all accounting standards, and the BAR's manual, which is what our office puts out as guidance for. And then the second bullet point is part of the prior period adjustment I was earlier discussing. And the largest portion of the prior period adjustment is due to sales tax receivable. And that had not previously been presented as an asset on the transit's financial statements. So this year we identified that, and that was added to the financial statements, and it also resulted in a prior period adjustment.
And this had, it always existed. It just hadn't been identified over time. And when we review financial statements, we select different balances. We cycle through different balances. And this is an item that was not identified until in the current year when we identified that the receivable balance wasn't even reported on the financial statements. Another big change was that the whole process of creating the financial statements had changed in the current year, where it had, in the prior year, it had been done by a CPA firm and then reviewed in-house, and now this year it's been all brought in-house. Paul did a great job. However, there wasn't a secondary review of the work to ensure that journal entries are reviewed, the financial statements are reviewed, and all these areas were subsequently corrected within the financial statements. So that secondary review, ensuring there's controls over the financial statements, is really that important aspect that we look for when reviewing the financial statements.
And you're talking about an internal secondary review, not the board's review of the financial information that's presented.
The board could be the review. There could be the finance committee review.
There's kind of two different things. The board's monthly review of like the packet of information, you know, the cash balance, the cash flows in and out. We did not identify any issue with that. It's the preparation of the year-end financial statements. So all the statements, the notes to the financial statements, and the accompanying schedules. So really the packet of information that we audit, just getting that secondary review. And we have discussed it a little bit with Paul and Ken, and just like who could do that review, what kind of items need to be included in that review. So it's really just the end packet or the end financial statements.
Yeah. And really, it can be another person within the transit. It could be the board, the finance committee, one member on the board, the executive director, even externally. We just want to see somebody who's knowledgeable of accounting practices in the BAR's manual, be able to look at Paul's work and be able to compare it to supporting documentation and ensure that what's being recorded is accurate.
Could we hire you, one of you, once a month?
Unfortunately
It wouldn't
not.
be independent. But this goes down to journal entries as well. So even down to the journal entries. And that's just a secondary review just to ensure that they're accurate and there isn't some error. At times we all can make errors. And so it's just a quick double check and sign off on journal entries and the financial statements to ensure that they're accurate and complete.
And the part that bothers me, and I'm just referring to my own self, I don't have the experience to be reviewing something that is supposed to be in compliance with the BAR standards and policies. That's a specialty in itself. So I think that's the work practically every day in that field, or at least have been. So what's your recommendation if we don't have that back, go to the outside?
Well, I mean, all of you hold a very wealth of knowledge associated with what the financial activity of the district is or the transit. And so you're aware of what the cash or what your revenues are, what your expenditures are. So your knowledge is actually really good knowledge of oversight. And then with Paul or someone within the transit being able to walk you through where the numbers come from, where the support from those numbers come from, I think all those things together really provide a good review of the financial statements. And even the walkthrough for the BAR's manual outlines a lot of what should be in there. and how it should be reported. And so it could be, I don't want to give Paul more work, but it could be more of a presentation or some sort of walkthrough
Get in more.
of the financial statements to explain where the numbers come from, what supports the numbers, and what the guidance says to use to report your financial statements. So you wouldn't be completely aware of all of the GASBs or anything that unusual or out of the ordinary, but you would be able to determine, I would think, in-house or even with the finance committee, you could always go outside as well, but be able to determine whether the financials are materially accurate and provide that oversight to know what's going out, what would be reported.
You and Bruce comfortable with that?
With him,
I mean, somebody has to watch the Fox too.
I was just gonna say, if one individual on the board was to kind of put oversight on Paul, if Paul goes to jail, does that person?
Just asking. That's what she said. It's a good question.
Yeah, I knew where you were going.
who's going to be the first subject?
And one other thing about that, we've already kind of discussed this a little bit further, but is really documenting that review and what you looked at, and showing that when we come in, we can see something that shows us that end financial statements, the notes, the journal entries throughout the year have been reviewed by a secretary.
And oftentimes we see that as, a signature on the financial statements, or highlights and questions, or an email correspondence, asking questions. Those are just examples of that we can kind of see that it was reviewed and questions, and that there was a discussion occurring.
So when that comes up, if I'm going to be the one doing it, yes I am. All it would require, if we agree what he's doing is correct, all I got to do is sign.
And we would, likely discuss with you, what it is that you look for, what it is that you discussed, and oftentimes, like I said, we see, questions or tick marks or highlights, or just something to show that there was an active review of the financial statements. That's one option.
Oftentimes we hear of really good controls and great understanding, and talk with multiple individuals at an entity, and they'll tell us the same story. However, with audit documentation, we're really looking for that documentation to support that the review happened. And so the review will take place, and then however there will be identification of how that review was conducted. And if it was at a finance committee meeting or something to that effect, that would be just part of the agenda item or something like that, where you're identifying that we're doing it with financial statements, and then we can see kind of the notes associated with that meeting.
Another example, just to throw ideas out there, that we've seen is like a checklist of different things that occurred. We compared the balance sheet to a trial balance, and there's Paul's signature and another person's their initials, and reviewed notes to bars made, just like each step where there's a sign off. That's one thing that we've seen as supporting that review as well.
So there's lots of variations.
Right. There's
we don't want to say there's any one way to do it.
Correct.
There's lots of different ways to document that review.
Okay.
Jill has a question for you.
Do you understand the difference between what we're doing and what they're saying? Because I feel like we did this. I felt like that Jim and I had a lot of meetings where we asked a lot of questions in preparation of the final documents, and we look at vouchers, and we have to approve those vouchers. And I thought, so I'm not saying that you're incorrect, but is it a documentation of what we're doing that we need to show? Because I feel like we're doing this.
As Kelly was saying, we reviewed really bi-monthly basis the goings on at the agency, cash balance, budget actual information, that sort of stuff. But what they're talking about is, before we present this, upload it into their system, we should do a detailed, documented review of the figures that we're just presenting to the audit staff, so that when they come 6 months later, or whenever they schedule that, they'll see that we've done that specific review of that specific end of year report.
What are the key words that's documented?
Well, and I believe that the reports or documents that's being reviewed, bi-monthly, as you stated, are reports that are internally created by the transit. However, this financial statements that we're discussing are GAAP financial statements that are required to cover the entire year, and that includes a balance sheet, an income statement, and the notes to the financial statements and management discussion analysis and supporting schedules. And so the form of the information is a little bit different, and those documents are what we audit and give an opinion on, which are different than the monthly statements.
Any other questions on the financial statement review management letter? So as we kind of, just a quick summary, our recommendation there is, again, just a secondary review of the financial statements, journal entries, which it looks like that Transit is on their way of developing that secondary review. If we get back to the